As it happened, I was smiling a good deal during the next few days prior to the big feast, for my cold had advanced to croup, and I was out of school the entire period. I had no contact with Odd Henderson, and therefore could not personally ascertain his reaction to the invitation. But I imagined it must have made him laugh first and spit next. The prospect of his actually appearing didn't worry me. It was as far-fetched as a possibility as Queenie snarling at me or Miss Sook betraying my trust in her. Yet Odd remained a presence, a red-headed silhouette on the threshold of my cheerfulness. Still, I was tantalized by the description his mother had provided. I wondered if it was true he had another side, that somewhere underneath the evil a speck of humaneness existed. But that was impossible. Anybody who believed so would leave their houses unlocked when the gypsies came to town. All you had to do was look at him. Miss Sook was aware that my croup was not as severe as I pretended, and so in the mornings, when the others had absented themselves, Uncle B to his farms and the sisters to their dry goods store, she tolerated my getting out of bed and even let me assist in the spring-like house cleaning that always preceded the Thanksgiving assembly. There was such a lot to do, enough for a dozen hands. We polished the parlor furniture, the piano, the black curio cabinet, which contained only a fragment of Stone Mountain the sisters had brought back from a business trip to Atlanta. The formal walnut rockers and florid Biedermeier pieces, rubbed them with lemon-scented wax until the place was shiny as lemon skin and smelled like a citrus grove. Curtains were laundered and rehung, pillows punched, rugs beaten. Wherever one glanced, dust motes and tiny feathers drifted in the sparkling November light, sifting through the tall rooms. Poor Queenie was relegated to the kitchen for fear she might leave a stray hair, perhaps a flea, in the more dignified areas of the house. The most delicate task was preparing the napkins and tablecloths that would decorate the dining room. The linen had belonged to my friend's mother, who had received it as a wedding gift. Though it had been used only once or twice a year, say 200 times in the past 80 years, nevertheless, it was 80 years old, and mended patches and freckled discolorations were apparent. Probably it had not been a fine material to begin with, but Miss Sook treated it as though it had been woven by golden hands on heavenly looms. My mother said the day may come when all we can offer is well water and cold cornbread, but at least we'll be able to serve it on a table set with proper linen. At night, after the day's dashing about and when the rest of the house was dark, one feeble lamp burned late while my friend, propped in bed with napkins massed on her lap, repaired blemishes and tears with thread and needle. Her forehead crumpled, her eyes cruelly squinted, yet illuminated by the fatigued rapture of a pilgrim approaching an altar at journey's end. From hour to hour, as the shivery tolls of the faraway courthouse clock numbered 10 and 11 and 12, I would wake up and see her lamp still lit, and would drowsily lurch into her room to reprimand her. You ought to be asleep. In a minute, Buddy. I can't just now. When I think of all the company coming, it scares me. Starts my head whirling, she said, ceasing to stitch and rubbing her eyes. Whirling with stars. Chrysanthemums. Okay, so these are flowers. Some as big as a baby's head. Bundles of curled, penny-colored leaves with flickering lavender underhues. Chrysanthemums, my friend commented as we moved through our garden, stalking flower show blossoms with decapitating shears, are like lions, kingly characters. I always expect them to spring, to turn on me with a growl and a roar. It was the kind of remark that caused people to wonder about Miss Sook, though I understood that only in retrospect, for I always knew just what she meant, and in this instant, the whole idea of it, the notion of lugging all those growling, gorgeous, roaring lions into the house and caging them in tacky vases, our final decorative act on Thanksgiving Eve, made us so giggly and giddy and stupid we were soon out of breath. "Look at Queenie," my friend said, stuttering with mirth. "Look at her ears, Buddy, standing straight up. She's thinking, well, what kind of lunatics are these I'm mixed up with? Ah, Queenie, come here, honey. I'm going to give you a biscuit dipped in hot coffee." A lively day that Thanksgiving, lively with on and off showers and abrupt sky clearings accompanied by thrusts of raw sun and sudden bandit winds snatching autumn's leftover leaves. The noises of the house were lovely, too, pots and pans and Uncle Bee's unused and rusty voice as he stood in the hall in his creaking Sunday suit, greeting our guests as they arrived. A few came by horseback or mule-drawn wagon, the majority in shined-up farm trucks and rackety flivvers. Mr. and Mrs. Conklin and their 4 beautiful daughters drove up in a mint green 1932 Chevrolet. Mr. Conklin was well off. He owned several fishing smackers that operated out of Mobile, an object which aroused warm curiosity among the men present. They studied and poked it and all but took it apart. The first guests to arrive were Mrs. Mary Taylor Wheelwright, escorted by her custodians, a grandson and his wife. She was a pretty little thing, Mrs. Wheelwright. She wore her age as lightly as the tiny red bonnet that, like the cherry on a vanilla sundae, sat perkily atop her milky hair. "Darlin' Bobby," she said, hugging Uncle Bee, "I realize we're an itty-bitty bit early, but you know me, always punctual to a fault," which was an apology deserved, for it was not yet 9 o'clock, and guests weren't expected much before noon. However, everybody arrived earlier than we intended, except the Perk McLeod family, who suffered 2 blowouts in the space of 30 miles and arrived in such a stomping temper, particularly Mr. McLeod, that we feared for the china. Most of these people lived year-round in lonesome places hard to get away from, isolated farms, whistle stops and crossroads, empty river hamlets, or lumber camp communities deep in the pine forests. So, of course, it was an eagerness that caused them to be early, primed for an affectionate and memorable gathering. And so it was. Some while ago, I had a letter from one of the Conklin sisters, now the wife of a naval captain and living in San Diego. She wrote, "I think of you often around this time of year, I suppose because of what happened at one of our Alabama Thanksgivings. It was a few years before Miss Sook died. Would it be 1933? Golly, I'll never forget that day." By noon, not another soul could be accommodated in the parlor, a hive humming with women's tattle and womanly aromas. Mrs. Wheelwright smelled of lilac water, and Annabelle Conklin liked geraniums after rain. The odor of tobacco fanned out across the porch, where most of the men had clustered, despite the wavering weather, the alternations between sprinkles of rain and sunlit wind squalls. Tobacco was a substance alien to the setting. True, Miss Sook now and again secretly dipped snuff, a taste acquired under unknown tutelage, and one she refused to discuss. Her sisters would have been mortified had they suspected, and Uncle Bee, too, for he took a harsh stand on all stimulants, condemning them morally and medicinally.